are talking about the 2018 sci-fi B-movie Astro. This one directed by Asif Akbar, who also co-wrote this with Bernard Sterling. And this stars genre favourite Gary Daniels. He's back, he's kicking ass in this kind of science fiction, very ambitious movie. So the story is kind of tied in with the kind of the Roswell landings back in the kind of the 1950s, I believe. So it's kind of like an alien movie, but it's much more of an action movie than a kind of science fiction film, to be quite honest. The plot is very, very ambitious, and it's both a positive and a detriment at the kind of the same time. But we'll come on to it. The basic kind of plot outline here is Gary Daniels is an ex-military man now living on this kind of ranch with his kind of with his young daughter, and he's approached by one of his old military buddies, played by Marshall Hinton, and he seems to have come into massive wealth and is actually developing his own kind of space travel, and no one really knows, you know, how he's come into this kind of like huge wealth and everything. And you know, he wants Gary Daniels to come and visit him on the, you know, his kind of like facility, etc. And as it turns out, he's discovered huge leaps in kind of technology and has actually got an alien prisoner. He's found an extraterrestrial in the form of this strange elf-looking guy who seems to share some kind of DNA with Gary Daniels' character, and that's why basically he wants Gary Daniels to come to this facility so he can kind of you know, find out what's going on. Add to this, you've got all sorts of kind of like government agents and kind of like action sequences. We've got these other kind of other two aliens that kind of appear, played by Costas Mandylor and Max Wasser. And yeah, it's basically a fairly sort of complex plot, but not necessarily a clear plot. So let's go into what works first of all. First of all, Gary Daniels, you know, he still looks as fantastic as he did back in the days of the VHS action movies that I used to buy. He's still got it. I mean, the guy was always my pick to play Iron Fist. If they, you know, long before Marvel kind of made that Netflix TV series, I thought he would be the perfect Iron Fist. And he's still got it. I mean, the guy can do an action sequence, I feel, and really sell those kind of martial art moves despite his advancing years. And he still looks great, I've got to say. And certainly one of my favourite, you know, B-movie genre actors. Him and Mark Dacascos are my two favourites. And there are some pretty decent fight scenes here, and like I've said, they're well shot, they're well edited, and you know, Gary Daniels looks like he's connecting, and they do look pretty, you know, pretty good. And like I've said, the plot here is very ambitious. I mean, this is not a kind of a typical kind of science fiction movie where they're just kind of rehashing old ideas. This is a very kind of like a complex and ambitious plot for a kind of a movie with obviously a very limited budget. So my hat's off to try and kind of make something this kind of complex on screen with obviously limited resources is really, you know, is quite the achievement in itself. And there are some kind of quite some fun cameos from other kind of famous faces that you'll see. Like I've mentioned, Costas Mandylor. You've got Michael Paré in it as well. So yeah, so it's quite fun for genre fans. It almost is a throwback to the kind of the straight-to-video VHS days of the 90s, I would say, where you used to get these kind of like movies. It really does feel like that. So if you were a fan of the Gary Daniels movies, you know, back like Spoiler and stuff like that, then you'll love this movie, I feel, because it really does kind of like have that kind of like classic feel to it. But what doesn't work? Well, unfortunately, I feel the plot here is very convoluted and doesn't make a lot of sense, coupled with some poor editing. The editing here is fairly poor, and it makes it quite hard to follow and about what's actually kind of supposed to be going on. And some things you've just got to, I don't really understand, but I've just got to kind of accept it. So the plot here, unfortunately, is a little bit all over the place. CGI. There is some really poor CGI spaceship scenes. Now this looks like graphics from a 2001 PS2 game. It's pretty bad. Aliens. Let's talk aliens. Now we have, I think, two species of aliens in this movie. we have our prisoner who looks like this this space elf, and he is the thing that fangirls would, it's a fangirl fantasy, this kind of sexy space elf with his kind of hair falling over his face and all of that. But then we have these aliens played by Maxine Wasser and Costas Mandylor that are just people in green paint, and they just look greasy, and Maxine Wasser's there with their cleavage hanging out all the time, and they just look they look like 50s, like 1950s. Obviously I know this has kind of got ties to the 1950s Roswell landings, but they look like a throwback to 1950s movies. We just have someone painted a different colour and that's it. So some of the effects here, I think they just haven't got the budget to do anything really with it. Some of the acting as well is a little bit wonky. Gary Daniels is great. He kind of plays more or less the same character, but I enjoy him. But we do have some of the supporting cast here, not the strongest actors. The movie is far too long. It needs to be about 20 minutes shorter. There are a lot of scenes that do not seem to be necessary to this movie. We have Gary Daniels' daughter kind of ends up with his brother and their family, and we spend a fair amount of time with them. Irrelevant to the story. It doesn't need to be there. So this film tends to drag a little bit because it just goes on forever, and it just seems to be way too long. This could have 20 minutes easily cut out of it, and we have this, this is what I'm going back to the editing. Scenes are just lingered on for far too long in certain sequences. So we just have this shot, and okay, cut. No, but it carries on, and it just pads out the running time, which it doesn't need to do, and then just just slows the film to a bit of a halt. So although I'm impressed with the ambition of this film, and Gary Daniels is as good as he's ever been, the plot of this story kind of bogs it down into sort of becoming somewhat of a mediocre film because it just doesn't it can't deliver on its ambition, unfortunately. So it's worth watching, I would say, for if you're a Gary Daniels fan and you enjoy his kind of stuff from years past, because it's very much more of the same. Or if you like a low budget movie that tries to do something different but ultimately doesn't always succeed, then it's worth watching for that. But ultimately, as a piece of entertainment, I feel it does end up becoming somewhat dull and kind of hard to follow, and people's motivations don't really seem all that clear and stuff like that, basically. And the billionaire still doesn't seem like a billionaire to me. So overall, I'll give this movie a 6 out of 10. I enjoyed it because I like Gary Daniels, and it's always fun to watch for me. But I feel for the average just cinema goer, film fan, you might find it a little bit hard to follow and ultimately lose interest. But 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave a comment and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.